Hello, welcome to the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
They said they were broke. I believed them until I saw the wedding dress. It's amazing, really, how quickly one truth can crumble under the weight of a single, glittering lie. I had been living off peanut butter toast and free clinic samples, stretching my painkillers and pretending the fire in my gut was something temporary. I told myself over and over again that they were doing their best, that not every family could afford medical expenses, that I wasn't owed anything just because I was in pain. And yet, the sight of that goddamn receipt, smooth, white, pristine, folded in half and tucked in a kitchen drawer, undid me in a way even the worst of my pain never had. I was 22 when the doctor told me I needed laparoscopic surgery. Endometriosis, stage 2, maybe stage 3. I remember the words chronic and progressive, and I remember how the fluorescent light above his desk flickered like it knew something I didn't. He was kind about it, offering options, referrals, hopeful phrases like quality of life and future fertility, but the truth was clear: if I didn't get the surgery soon, my body was going to start turning against itself faster than it already was. I brought the paperwork home like a kid bringing home a failing report card. I waited until after dinner, meatloaf night, because my dad always wanted meatloaf on Thursdays, and I laid the estimates on the table between my parents like they were a peace offering. My mom didn't even look up from her phone. My dad gave me this look, the kind that says, "Not now," even though there was never a good time. I cleared my throat and said, "It's just under $6,000 with insurance. I'll pay half. I can get a loan if I need to. I need some help." My mother's response was immediate and surgical. "Honey, we just don't have it right now." I remember that line exactly. I remember the way she said it like it was rehearsed, like she had used it before and it had worked then. My dad nodded solemnly, that slow, fatherly nod that implies understanding without commitment. They made noises about how tough things are right now, and how your sister's finishing school, and how maybe next year, as if my uterus was going to take a sabbatical and wait for a better fiscal quarter. So I found a way. I always did. I took out a private loan under a disgusting interest rate and picked up a second job cleaning offices at night. I slept 3 hours a night and drank coffee like it was medication. Eventually, I had to drop out of my final semester because I couldn't keep up. My body started to deteriorate faster than I could fake being okay. I passed out at my desk once and woke up to an ambulance ride I couldn't afford and a diagnosis I already knew. Still, I smiled through it because that's what good daughters do. They don't make waves. They survive quietly. Meanwhile, my sister Emily was planning her wedding like it was an episode of one of those reality shows she binge-watched growing up. She wanted the whole fantasy: flower walls, string quartets, champagne fountains. She said yes to a venue that cost more than my entire education and picked a dress from some boutique in Los Angeles that required appointments booked a year in advance. I watched from the sidelines, clapping and smiling, trying to ignore the twisting in my stomach that was only half from the disease. It was 2 months before the wedding when I found the receipt. I wasn't snooping, not exactly. I had stopped by the house to pick up a box of my old books my mom had asked me to get out of the garage. While I was there, I offered to help clear some of the kitchen counters, old habit, and I was wiping down a drawer handle when it jammed. Inside was the receipt, folded twice, pristine and smug. The header read, La Belle Bridal Boutique. Below that, in crisp print, it said, total, $30,412. I stared at that number for a full minute, long enough for my eyes to blur. My hand started to shake. I put the receipt back exactly where I found it, closed the drawer, and wiped the handle again like I'd never been there. I walked out of that house and sat in my car for 30 minutes without starting the engine. I couldn't think. I couldn't cry. I couldn't even be angry, not yet. What I felt in that moment was deeper, heavier. Like being buried alive under the realization that your pain was always optional to them. I thought about the nights I cried myself to sleep in a moldy apartment with no heating, about the days I skipped meals to afford my medication, about the moment I realized I'd never have children. And all the while, my parents were saying no to me and yes to sequins and a custom veil. And that's when I knew I was never the daughter they chose. I didn't confront them the night I found the receipt, though God knows I wanted to. I drove home with my hands locked tight on the steering wheel, white-knuckled and silent, the air in my car so thick with betrayal I could barely breathe. My chest ached in that familiar, dull way it did before my flare-ups, but this time it wasn't physical. It was grief and humiliation and fury, all tangled together like a knotted necklace you don't have the patience to undo. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up with the lamp on, rereading my old medical bills, and wondering just how much dignity I had traded over the years for their approval, for a seat at a table I never really belonged to. A week passed before I even spoke to my parents again. I waited, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted the perfect moment, one where I could ask a question without showing my hand. I didn't want them to see the wound. I wanted to watch them talk around it, to see if they would lie to my face the way they had lied behind my back. So when I called my mother one Thursday afternoon, it was all casual tones and breezy politeness, like we hadn't grown miles apart in just a matter of days. "Hey, Mom," I said, stirring cold coffee like I was in some poorly lit indie film. "Do you remember when I asked for help with that surgery a few years back?" There was a pause. Not a long one, just enough to make the truth twitch behind her voice. "Of course, honey," she said. "That was a really hard time for all of us." And then the line I'd never forget. "It just wasn't the right time, sweetie." Like I'd been asking for a damn vacation. Like chronic pain waits until your budget clears up. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard it bled, and I made a little sound that might have passed for agreement. She started talking about Emily's wedding then, about how fast everything was moving and how expensive things had gotten, like that explained something. "They said they spent nearly $50,000 on the whole wedding," I said, pretending to be impressed. But when I added it up, $10,000 for catering, $20,000 for the venue, $15,000 for the dress, that's only $35,000. I said it out loud on purpose, the kind of mistake that makes people tilt their head. I wanted her to correct me. I wanted her to flinch. Instead, she just laughed and said, "Oh, well, I guess it adds up faster than you think." She didn't even notice the math was off by 10,000. 10,000. That was the surgery. That was my future. The wedding came and went like a hurricane wearing a tiara. I showed up in a navy blue dress I borrowed from a friend, one that didn't quite fit right in the waist, but made my arms look strong. I smiled through the photos, toasted with sparkling cider instead of champagne, and danced twice, once with my dad, who smelled like cheap cologne and nervous sweat, and once with Emily's new husband, who kept calling me the mysterious sister. I was gracious. I was charming. I was everything they had trained me to be. But something inside me was splintering, one small crack at a time. I couldn't stop thinking about that damn number, about how casually they had dismissed what I needed so they could fund a night of chandeliers and custom cupcakes. They had built a castle on top of my sacrifices and called it family. So I started keeping notes. Not out of spite, not at first. It was more like preservation, like I needed proof that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined the favoritism and the silences, and the way I always seemed to be just outside the circle. I started recording the things they said, not with microphones, but in notebooks and apps and emails I sent to myself late at night. My mother's offhand comments about how Emily always had such presence. My father's quiet insistence that not every kid needs the same kind of support. The way they always framed Emily's choices as investments and mine as phases. I collected their words the way someone might collect debt. And the more I wrote down, the more I began to see the patterns, how they minimized my pain but magnified hers, how every disappointment I experienced was met with indifference, but every bruise she got brought the cavalry. It wasn't rage I felt. It was clarity. Cold and sharp and clean. So when the photographer posed us in front of the floral arch and someone yelled, "Say family," I smiled with my whole face and leaned in like I belonged. But inside, I was collecting evidence. Emily was the kind of girl who entered a room and instantly made it feel warmer, brighter, like someone had turned the volume up on life, just a little bit louder and more interesting. She had this laugh that bounced off the walls, hair that always curled just the right amount at the ends, and a smile that seemed engineered for approval. People loved Emily. Teachers gave her extra credit she didn't need. Coaches picked her first whether or not she was the best. Boys orbited her like she had her own gravitational pull. She was sunshine in a bottle, loud and glowing and blinding if you stood too close for too long. And me? I was the shadow that followed her around unnoticed, the quiet one, the responsible one, the one who turned off the lights and made sure the doors were locked after the party ended. I was not bitter about it, not at first. When you grow up being compared to someone like Emily, you learn how to fold yourself up neatly into the corners of the family photo. You learn how to be useful, small, invisible, easy. I stopped asking for things long before I was old enough to understand why they weren't coming. Emily got braces in middle school because she wanted a perfect smile, even though her teeth were already straight. I remember watching her choose the color of the little rubber bands like it was the hardest decision she'd ever made, while I sat in the waiting room reading a book with a cracked spine and wondering when my headaches would get bad enough to earn attention. When prom rolled around, she got the kind of dress you see in magazines, strapless, sequined, custom-fitted. I got a hand-me-down from a girl in church, a size too big in the waist and tight in the chest, because we couldn't afford to go all out twice. Cheer camp? She went every summer. New car for her 16th birthday? A white Honda with a red bow. I got my dad's old Toyota, the one with a passenger door that only opened from the inside. And even when I did well, straight A's, scholarships, part-time jobs, they didn't light up the way they did when Emily came home with a new boy or a cheerleading trophy or a funny story from school. It was like she was the main character, and I was the lighting technician behind the curtain. Our father once told a family friend over beers and grilled steak, "Emily just needs more from us," as if I was some kind of low-maintenance houseplant you could water once a week and forget about. But the real break came the night I overheard my mother on the phone, talking to a cousin whose voice I couldn't hear, but whose questions were clearly about me. I was walking down the hallway to grab a bottle of water from the fridge, barefoot and quiet, and I paused just outside the door when I heard my name. We had to do what was right, my mother was saying, her voice that measured cocktail of guilt and justification she reserved for things she didn't want to admit. For the child who would actually use her life. That sentence burned itself into the lining of my stomach. I stood there in the dark, gripping the hallway wall like it was the only thing keeping me upright. I wasn't even angry, at least not at first. I felt something else. I felt erased. Like all the pain, the surgeries, the nights alone, the missed birthdays, the years I spent surviving while smiling, none of it mattered because I wasn't marketable enough, not shiny enough, not easy to love in the right kind of way. I spiraled after that. Therapy didn't work the first time or the second. I tried it all, rage that spilled out onto strangers, whiskey I couldn't afford, nights spent dancing in bars where no one knew my name and I could lie about who I was. I once told a guy I met in Memphis that I was an only child, and when he asked if that was lonely, I laughed so hard I cried right there in the booth. Eventually, the rage dulled into indifference. And honestly, that scared me more. Because when you stop feeling anything toward the people who raised you, who are supposed to know you best, it's like becoming a ghost in your own life. I changed jobs and moved 3 states over without telling anyone. I didn't send a forwarding address. I didn't change my number. I just disappeared quietly, the way I had lived. I worked days and took long walks at night, learning the names of unfamiliar streets, letting the anonymity wash over me like a baptism. No one came looking. No one even asked. Not until Emily got pregnant, and suddenly I was worth finding again. A text came through from my mother. just a picture of an ultrasound and a message that read, "Your sister's baby shower is in May. We hope you'll come." No apology. No acknowledgement. Just an invitation sent out like a fishing line, expecting me to bite. I stared at the message for a long time, my phone glowing cold in my hand. I thought about the child inside her, growing up into a world where one sibling might get everything and another might get nothing. I thought about whether I would be expected to smile again for pictures I didn't belong in. And then came the baby shower and the invitation I never responded to. Time has a funny way of dulling the edges of a blade, but never quite removing the sting when it slips between your ribs again. It had been almost 4 years since I moved away, since I last stood in my parents' living room or tasted my mother's sweet potato casserole with the burnt marshmallows on top. I had built a new life like a fortress, not out of anger anymore, but out of necessity. I worked in clinical research, nothing glamorous, but steady and satisfying, the kind of job where the data speaks louder than people and no one expects you to smile if you don't feel like it. I had a good circle of friends, the kind who knew not to ask too many questions and respected when I said things like, "I'm not close with my family." I had a cat named Fennel who slept on my chest every night, and a studio apartment with terrible plumbing, but perfect morning light. Boundaries became my religion, and I kept them sharp and holy. Then the messages started. It wasn't sudden or dramatic. There wasn't a desperate phone call in the middle of the night or some knock on the door. It was slow, like ivy creeping over the side of a house. First it was my mother, of course, always my mother, with her signature blend of guilt and politeness. "Just checking in," she wrote once. "Your sister misses you. Your dad cried last week. We just want you home." Like I was a dog that had run off and simply needed whistling back. I didn't respond to that one. Or the next 5. I let them pile up in my inbox like junk mail, their subject lines pleading, saccharine, manipulative. Then, on a Sunday morning after a particularly good date with a guy who actually listened more than he talked, I wrote back a single sentence, short, sharp, and cold. I hope the wedding was worth it. I never got a reply. Not a word. But the silence that followed felt like victory. I didn't rage or curse them out. I didn't show up at their doorstep or send long, poetic rants about how much they'd hurt me. No, my revenge was quieter than that, more methodical. I missed every family holiday with surgical precision. Christmas? I sent a card with a pre-written message from a box set I bought at Walgreens. "Wishing you warmth this season. Signed, Rachel." No personal notes. No photos. Just ink and apathy. Thanksgiving? I turned my phone off and hosted a potluck with friends who knew how to say thank you and mean it. I even skipped Emily's baby's first birthday, which apparently caused a full-blown meltdown at the party. Something about, how dare she and doesn't she care about family? No, I didn't. Not anymore. And then, one spring afternoon, I got a message from Emily herself. It was longer than I expected, more raw. She said her marriage wasn't what she thought it would be. She said the baby didn't sleep and her husband worked too much and that sometimes she sat in her closet with the door closed just to cry. She said she missed me, not the photo version of me, but the real me. She wanted coffee. Just coffee. No drama. Just to see me. Curiosity won out over caution, and I said yes. We met at a little cafe in a part of town she'd clearly never been to before, her makeup a little too perfect, her smile just a little too forced. I was already seated when she arrived, sipping a latte and pretending to read something academic on my phone. "Rachel," she said, like the word tasted strange in her mouth. "Emily," I answered, not offering a hug. She ordered chamomile tea like it would fix anything. We talked, or rather, she talked and I listened. About her life. About the baby. About the arguments and the silence between them. She kept circling around to us, to the idea that we used to be close, that we shared a room once, that we used to play make-believe in the backyard and braid each other's hair. "I need you," she said eventually, her voice cracking just slightly at the edge. "You're my sister." I let the silence stretch between us like taffy. I stared at her and thought about everything she had, the dress, the party, the parents who never doubted her, and everything I'd had to become just to survive their neglect. And then I said, calmly, slowly, "You never needed me until your fairy tale broke." She cried. I didn't comfort her. She gathered her bag and left quickly, her hand trembling as she pushed open the door. I stayed. She left in tears. I finished my latte. There are moments in life when silence feels heavier than shouting, and for me, it started with a question I had never asked before, not because I didn't need to, but because I had spent most of my adult life convincing myself that needing help made me weak. But this time, I couldn't pretend anymore. After months of waking up with a clenched jaw and a racing heart, after pushing through workdays that felt like swimming through molasses, after losing a relationship I thought was my future, something cracked. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was final. I sat on the edge of my bathtub one night, fully clothed, staring at my reflection in the medicine cabinet mirror, and the only thought in my head was, this isn't working. Life wasn't working. Me pretending I was okay wasn't working. I wasn't suicidal, I wasn't in danger, but I was exhausted in a way that felt cellular, like my bones had stopped regenerating hope. So, I did something radical, something completely out of character. I asked my parents for help. I called them on a Sunday morning, the way I used to when I lived in my college dorm, and pretended I was just homesick and not quietly unraveling. My dad answered, gruff as ever, distracted by whatever rerun he was watching. My mom was in the background. I could hear her organizing something. She always needed to organize something when she was avoiding emotions. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I was wondering if we could talk about something kind of important." That alone should have been a red flag, the way the air immediately tightened on their end of the line. My dad muted the TV, and my mom suddenly sat down. "I've been thinking about starting therapy," I said, "but my insurance doesn't really cover it, and I'm stretched kind of thin financially right now. I was wondering if you could maybe help out a little, just with the first few sessions, until I get on my feet again." There was a pause. Not a long one, but long enough. My dad was the first to speak, and he said it like he was stepping around a minefield. "I mean, therapy's pretty expensive, isn't it?" I nodded before I realized he couldn't see me. "Yeah, it's not cheap, but it's something I really think I need right now." He made a noise like he was chewing the inside of his cheek. My mom jumped in before he could respond. "Have you tried journaling?" she asked. "Or maybe going for walks in the morning?" "Sometimes when I'm overwhelmed, I just make a gratitude list. Maybe that could help." I bit down so hard on my lip I tasted blood. "I've been doing all of that," I said. "This isn't about being ungrateful. This is about needing professional help." Dad sighed. "Sweetie, we're not saying no forever. It's just that we've got a lot going on financially too right now. You know your brother's been having a rough time at work, and we've been trying to help him and Chelsea out where we can." I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, heartbeat suddenly in my throat. I wasn't asking for a handout. I wasn't asking for a damn vacation. I was asking them to help me not fall apart. I got off the phone politely. I said I understood. I even thanked them. 3 days later, I opened Instagram and saw it. Ben and Chelsea, his glowing influencer of a wife, smiling under an orange sky in Florence, holding hands in front of the Duomo. The caption said, "Finally taking that break we so deserve." Family is everything. It was the phrase that did it for me. Family is everything. I stared at that photo like it had punched me. They looked so happy, so healthy, so untouched. Meanwhile, I was dragging myself through days on autopilot, counting quarters to afford groceries, carrying the shame of being the dramatic one for asking for something real. That same night, I stopped following them. Not just on social media, but emotionally. I unfollowed the part of me that kept craving their approval like it was oxygen. I realized I had been running on fumes they never intended to replace. No explanation. No goodbye. Just a clean, Digital erasure. I think people expect explosions when relationships collapse, screaming matches, dramatic exits, slammed doors, but more often than not, it's just a door that never gets opened again. And for the first time in years, the silence felt like mine. It was a Thursday when the call came in, the kind of cloudy afternoon that makes everything feel a little heavier than it should, and I remember staring at the name on my phone as if seeing Mom spelled out in digital letters might suddenly make her voice sound different. But it didn't. She didn't cry when she told me. Her voice was flat and precise, as if reciting a grocery list she didn't want to forget. "Your father's gone," she said. "Heart attack." It was sudden. There was a pause, then a shallow inhale, and then, "The service is on Saturday. It would mean a lot to your sister if you came." She didn't say it would mean anything to her. That was important. That told me everything. I hung up without offering a promise, and I spent the next 48 hours in a kind of fog I hadn't felt since my 20s, not quite grief, not quite numbness, but something closer to disorientation. Like walking through a house you used to live in that's now been repainted and staged for strangers. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat with it, drank too much coffee, and imagined the scene. The eulogies, the hushed voices, the condolences offered like pity mints at the bottom of a purse. I debated not going, truly and honestly debated it. I told myself I didn't owe anyone closure, least of all them. I had buried the version of my father I needed years ago, the man who used to carry me on his shoulders when the waves at the beach got too big, the man who taught me how to patch drywall and pick a good peach. That version had been chipped away by years of silence, of watching him nod along while my mother handed Emily the world wrapped in a bow. Still, something kept tugging at me, not obligation, not guilt, but maybe a need to see it all one more time, just to be sure I hadn't imagined how far I'd drifted. So I showed up. Late, on purpose. I walked into the back of the church just as the priest was offering his final blessing, wearing a deep, blood-red dress that clung to me in all the places I wanted it to. I didn't wear black. I didn't lower my eyes. People turned when they saw me, some whispering with quick glances, others shifting uncomfortably in their pews. Emily looked up from the front row, eyes swollen, face blotchy, and for a moment she looked like a child again, unsure whether to run or beg. My mother didn't look at me at all. After the service, I stood by myself under a tree outside, not quite in the group, not quite gone. A few distant relatives gave me that vague half-hug of confusion, unsure how much they should say or how well they even remembered me. Eventually, a man I barely recognized, some old friend of my father's or a cousin maybe, approached with a small envelope in his hand. He said nothing, just pressed it into my palm and nodded once before walking away. The envelope was yellowed at the edges, the ink slightly faded, and across the front, in my father's handwriting, were the words, "My strong girl." I waited until I was alone, sitting in the passenger seat of my car with the engine off and the windows fogging slightly from my breath. I opened the envelope slowly, not out of reverence but caution, like it might contain a truth that would unmake me. The letter was short. A few lines, scribbled in blocky handwriting that looked rushed, almost panicked. "Rachel, I wanted to help you. I swear I did. I sold my coin collection to cover your surgery. I gave the money to your mother to handle it. I thought it was taken care of. I only found out later it went to the wedding. I didn't know how to fix it. I'm sorry. I hope someday you'll believe I tried. Dad, that was it. No excuses. No grand confession. Just a man's final attempt to rewrite the end of a chapter he had let someone else narrate for too long." I didn't cry. I didn't tear the letter up or press it to my chest like in the movies. I read it twice, folded it back neatly, and drove to the house for the reception. I stayed long enough to eat a slice of dry carrot cake and pretend I wasn't listening to the way people talked about my father like he was some flawless monument. My mother never spoke to me that day. She didn't ask about the letter. I doubt she even knew it was delivered. I walked through my old bedroom before I left. The wallpaper was the same, The window still creaked when you pushed it open, and on the desk sat a photo of Emily and me from when we were kids, me with a crooked smile and missing tooth, her with bows in her hair and frosting on her chin. I stared at it for a long time, trying to remember the last time I felt like I was hers and she was mine. I left the letter on the table and closed the door behind me. Maybe I was wrong to disappear, but maybe they were wrong first. You tell me, who gets to come home after a betrayal like that?